Many of you might be familiar with David, but if this is your first visit to one of David's webinars, we're wishing you an extra warm welcome, and we hope that your first webinar isn't your last. It's really exciting to see this community of leaders grow, and it's really encouraging to see so many people who are committed to learning, to growing, and moving forward in their personal leadership journey. I will get to some housekeeping, but before I do, I'll just take a quick moment to introduce myself. My name is Kristen. I recently participated in an authentic leadership masterclass led by David, and the experience over 8 weeks had a tremendous impact on my life and my leadership practice. Not only with the knowledge that I gained, but the connection also resulted in me joining David's team a few weeks ago, and I truly could not be more excited. David's work and teachings spoke deeply to me, and I genuinely believe that David is making an incredible difference in this world by transforming leaders of all levels. I really want to support his mission, and if there was any way that I could help what was already an amazing team, I was 100% in. So we're going to be together for 90 minutes today. The first hour will be David's presentation, and then we will follow that up with some Q&A and some shared dialogue about David's presentation. If you think of any questions during the presentation, or if anything inspires you and you'd like to comment or share, make a note and please bring it forward at the end. We would really love to hear from you. And we have a wonderful crowd that's joining us today. We just want to make sure anyone who wants to share gets a chance to share. So we just ask that your comments or questions are about a minute or so for sharing, that everybody gets a chance. Although the main session will be recorded, we're going to turn off the recording for the Q&A period. So it's a private, safe space for us all to spend some time together. Also, as we go along, if anything resonates with you, please feel free to post in the chat for everyone to see. And for those of you that are able to stay until the end with us today, we have a really special surprise. We're going to be doing a draw at the end for a free tuition into David's Authentic Leadership Academy, which is our 3-day live event coming up this spring. David's going to share more about the Academy and his vision a little bit later on, but it is going to be an amazing experience, and one of you is going to get to attend absolutely free. So without further ado, we will hear from David.
Thank you, Kristen. It's a great addition to this team, and you're going to get introduced here toward the end. I'll say more about you, but I really appreciate everybody coming here tonight, sharing your time with us. You know what, I just would love to just get a little bit of engagement from people in the chat room. So if you want to just write in the chat room where you're from and just introduce yourself to each other, feel free to have dialogue during the chat, and we'll just get a sense of where everybody's from and just the diversity of people that are here tonight. The other thing is, I would encourage you while I'm presenting, you can feel free to turn off your camera. And then I purposely and intentionally don't use a webinar mode, which means if some of you have been in webinars where you can only see the speaker and you can't see each other, and it's a little more private during the presentation, but the downside of it is that we can't have a dialogue after. You have to have a dialogue through the chat room, and I like to have in-person, face-to-face, authentic, real conversations. So I'll be purposefully leaving having this mode so that we can have that conversation afterwards. All right, let's get right into the content here. I'm going to take you on a journey in this next hour and a half. And, you know, for those of you who know me, know that this isn't just a presentation, it's a journey. And I'm inviting you to come along with me. This is the agenda for that journey. We're going to talk about leadership and authenticity. I'm going to give you some of my thoughts about leadership. And it's so good to see some familiar faces out there. Alan, it's good to see you, Ron, and and Shirley. Just great to see some familiar faces. Anyway, we're going to talk. I digress. So we're going to talk about leadership and authenticity, and I'm going to give you some of my thoughts about what leadership is, and the whole foundation of my work is around authenticity, and I'll give you some of my thoughts around that. I want to talk about adversity and the call to leadership today. I've picked adversity because I've tried to find a common thread that would be common for every person in this room. that would run through the lives and the work of every person. And I'm going to suggest that I'm assuming in the last 2 years that we've faced some adversity collectively and personally. You've likely had some adversity in your past. The whole purpose of life, frankly, folks, is to learn and to grow and to contribute. And so in order to do that, that requires adversity that we come up against. And so how we face adversity is a call to leadership. And I hope it will be a uniting experience for us. I'm about finding our commonalities, not our differences. And so we're going to talk about adversity and the call to leadership. And then I'm going to talk about the 4 decisions to become a leader in the midst of adversity, so that we can use adversity as an opportunity to be a leader. Let me just share with you a little bit. For those of you who don't know me, this is a cross section of some of the organizations I've worked with. I've been in the leadership development field now for almost 35 years. I really have three sections of my three components to my career. The first third of my career was spent in the area of family therapy. And I was a family therapist. Very interesting when you're a family therapist, no one ever brings in their good kids. So I always saw the people with problems and I thought there's got to be a better way to do this. And so I started to do talks, and a big focus back in the 80s for me was raising accountable kids. And what ended up happening is that I ended up getting business executives at my parenting talks. And they said, would you come and present this same material to our organization? And I knew nothing about organizations at the time, but I just took what I learned about families and adapted it into my presentations around organizations. And the content was so well received. I gave up my family therapy practice. I thought, this is where I'm really meant to be, in the corporate area. And so I spent time, I went into business with 2 other organizational development consultants. We wrote a book on accountability. It was my philosophy and it was their tool. And we really, for almost 15 years, really focused on building accountability within organizations and helping build accountable systems. But there was something missing in that work, and I was evolving into what real leadership is. And what was missing was this whole notion of authenticity. And I began to integrate and move toward really working around authenticity. And for the last, I'm going to say the last 15 years, really, plus years, I've really integrated the work of accountability into the work of authenticity. And I want to share with you what that is. Now, my mission is that I inspire leaders at all levels of organizations and all walks of life to make a meaningful difference in the world, build lasting success, and create a life that matters by living and leading the authentic way. This is my life's work. It's not a job for me. And I'm going to be I'll be sharing with you the next chapter of my life and what vision I have created to build authentic communities of difference makers who are committed to staying authentic and supporting each other on that journey. But before we get there, let me just share this whole notion of integrating authenticity with accountability. And I always suggest that, and we're not going to get into this in great detail, but just to give you a high level, accountability without authenticity is what I would call drudgery. Who on their tombstone do they want? Well, I achieved all of my to-do list, and I was an accountable person. Well, it's necessary to be accountable in life, but it's not sufficient to build an engaging, lasting, sustainable culture. At the same time, authenticity, which we're going to really spend some time drilling into today, being an authentic leader, authenticity without accountability is what I would call fantasy. But when you integrate those two together and build a culture around that, it's unstoppable. And it's what I would call your destiny, is when we integrate those two components together. So my whole work is based on this book that I've since written in the last 5 years. And it's based on the notion of the other Everest. We all know that the Everest is more than 8,000 meters, the highest point on the planet. But there's another, what's less known is that the lowest point on the planet is this thing called the Mariana Trench at more than 8,000 meters below sea level. And it's that journey inward. So if I'm going to believe in you, then what that means is that it requires my work to go in my soul and to go deeply within myself in order to have credibility and for you to believe in me. And this is the work of what we mean by authentic leadership. Now, my good friend and colleague, Dr. David Lertzman, some of you on this call I know knew David, a beautiful human being. And if you Google David, he was a university professor through the business school at University of Calgary, a tremendous outdoorsman, a tremendous contributor to students. You will hear pages of attribution of the impact that David had on his students and the lives of the people that he served. And tragically and ironically, David was killed last year in a grizzly bear attack. And he was truly, in my mind, authentic. And I'm going to paraphrase a quote that impacted me, that he has given me in terms of being a colleague. Authentic leadership hinges on the insight that who you are as a person is your most valuable contribution. The more present you can be for yourself and the more at peace you can be with yourself in any given moment, the more able you are to be of service to others. And this is the foundational principle that I operate from. And I was so aligned with David's work and the contribution that he made to his students and to the world at large. So what are we really saying here? What have I learned about leadership? Here's 5 things that I've learned about leadership over these last 30 years. First of all, you can get promoted to being a boss, but you can't get promoted to being a leader. A boss is a position. Leadership is a presence. And the second thing is that leadership has nothing to do with the size of your office or the letters after your name. It's truly about presence, not position. And you aren't a leader until someone declares you one. You can't stand up and say you're a leader. I can't stand up and say I'm a leader. In fact, the best leaders, the most amazing part of my job that I've been so blessed with are the incredible leaders that I know I have learned as much from as that they have taught me. And I can tell you that the majority of leaders that I would call a leader don't even see themselves as being a leader. They're just passionately going about their work and making a difference in whatever way they can and using their gifts in the service of others. They don't really see themselves as a leader. And so you're not really a leader until someone declares you one. And my vision is that leadership is held to the same standard and degree of rigor as any profession. You don't get to be a doctor through a promotion. You don't get promoted to being a doctor. You don't get promoted to being an engineer. You don't get promoted to being a lawyer. You have to rigorously spend thousands of hours developing a thought process and learning to be in that profession. You can't call yourself a doctor by putting a stethoscope around your neck. You might look like a doctor, but you're not a doctor until you've paid the price. And this is what leadership requires. The paradox of leadership is that it requires years of development. And I would suggest and submit for your consideration, what if we treated leadership as a profession and invested years of our life? At the same time, paradoxically, it requires a decision to say, you know what, I'm going to step into this desire to want to make a difference and earn the right to perhaps be called a leader. But that doesn't drive what leaders that I call authentic. That's not the motivation. The motivation is to make a difference. And my last point is a test of leadership is how you face adversity in your life. So I want to spend a minute talking about this universal thread that runs through all of our lives, through the adversity. And if you haven't had adversity, just wait around. It's going to happen in your life. This is what comes up with in life. And what adversity does is it presents us with the crossroads. It presents us with a decision. You know, I box, and I really suck at it. I'm not very good, but I've created this little bubble. A friend of mine who's been my boxing coach, we spar in his basement once a week, and we lift weights a couple of times a week. It's been kind of our bubble, and it's certainly been my therapy over this last couple of years in this pandemic. But David has a poster in his basement. It's a Mike Tyson quote. He says, "Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face." And folks, we've all been punched in the face in one way or another, through loss, through our grief, through our fears, through, whatever that has been. We've all been punched in the face. And how do we respond to that? Well, there's a choice that we have when we're up against adversity. One choice is the road more traveled, which is the road of being a victim. And the other road is the road of being a leader. And I'm going to suggest to you what the difference might be around that. Victims, and we all get into this victim path. It's the path that's the easiest to travel. It's about blame and complaining and criticizing, and it's about taking. It's about destroying and dividing. It's about entitlement that says, you know what, I'm entitled to this society. I'm entitled to a life that is free of adversity. And if you create adversity in my life, I'm going to make you wrong. And it's a force of what I would call a force of ruin. I know that my mother lived through 4 pandemics in her lifetime. and she lost 2 siblings in childhood growing up. I think if she were alive today, I think she might say we're a little spoiled getting through this pandemic and what we've been asked to do for the sake of the betterment of the whole. At any rate, that's the victim side. Now, the leader side says, I'm going to take a path. And by the way, if you throw social media onto victimhood, it's not going to end very well. We just amplify all of the victim mentality that, and I don't want to be critical of the victim mentality, and I don't want to in any way label people as victims. It's a response where we behave. There's victim actions. And what happens is, I believe that all actions that would be labeled as victims are actually actions that are protecting ourselves. This is all ways that we protect ourselves from the pain of facing adversity. And we distract rather than deepen. And we distract from the authenticity of ourselves, and we protect ourselves when we're hurting. And leadership means we have to face the reality of life. One definition of character that I use is the courage to face the demands of reality. Leaders mean we're going to face reality, and I'll give you some ideas around that in terms of authenticity. But leadership is about a commitment to build and grow and give rather than take. Unites. It's a sense of gratitude, and it's a force of nature. And it's a decision that moves you from being a victim and operating on the victim side to being over in the leader side. It's a fundamental decision that can be absolutely life-changing. And when we talk about being a force of nature, I come back to the great playwright and George Bernard Shaw, the great Irish playwright, at 93 said this is the true joy of life. My mother and father would have loved this quote, this guy. This is the true joy of life, the being used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one. The being a force of nature, instead of a feverish, selfish clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I love that quote. So this is about stepping into making a decision to be a leader. Now, most of you who know me know that I give credit to my parents. The first leaders, who are the first leaders in our life? And it's always our parents. And I would suggest, folks, that we lead today and we live today the way that we were led in our family by default. If you lead in a way that's better and more effective and more impactful than the way your parents raised you, then it means only one thing: you've worked on yourself. And we have a tendency to label and to say that, and to talk about the destructiveness of our upbringing, but maybe what was happening in our upbringing was helping us become the kind of people that we are today. But I digress and I get a little bit ahead of myself. But what I learned from my parents is that when it comes to leadership, ability matters, but inner qualities matter more. Who you are as a person will be far more important than what you do as a leader. All right. Now, having said that, I'm going to talk about 4 decisions. And this is really the inner qualities of leadership, what I call character, the 4 decisions to become a leader in the midst of adversity that we're in. Now, these are 4 decisions that you can become a leader at any time, but we can amplify it. As I say, I often say, adversity does not determine a person, it reveals a person. When you come up against some difficulty in your life, and when you hit adversity, it's not if, when you hit adversity in your life, it will reveal those inner qualities. Now, we all have to-do lists, and my premise is that as a leader, that to make that decision to walk the leadership path imperfectly means a to-be list. And so I would recommend to and commend to your work to see what would be your to-be list. These are my 4 qualities, decisions that make a leader. All right, let's talk about being accountable. And we won't go into this. This is a whole day workshop on being accountable. But basically, let me share with you accountability. I spent a summer a couple of years ago out in Nova Scotia learning how to sail. And an amazing, amazing summer. And it's so impressive to watch a sailor, to watch someone who knows how to take any wind, any situation, and say, we're going to go from here to there. It doesn't matter what the wind is. I just need to learn to maneuver the sail. As we say, an optimist will expect the wind to change. A pessimist will not expect the wind to change, but a leader will work with the sail in any wind. And Ella Wheeler Wilcox, who has been very influential in my life as a great poet and author in the early days of the 1900s, wrote this beautiful poem. One ship sails east and another west by the self same winds that blow. 'Tis the set of the sails, not the gales, that tells the way that we go. Like the winds of the sea are the waves of time as we journey along through life. 'Tis the set of the soul that determines the goal, and not the calm or the strife. This is about accountability. This is saying, regardless, I'm going to take accountability to move into this as a learning opportunity. I'm going to take accountability to create my own culture here. I'm not going to waste the time. I'm going to decide once and for all that all blame is a waste of time. And I'm going to take responsibility for my contribution. Now, the best story that I can come up with is Amanda at Crystal Glass. And I'll tell you about Amanda. Now, if you've ever are out in Cochrane, I would encourage you. We live, I'm about a half an hour west of Calgary. I know we got people here from around the continent, and so it may be quite a trip to make it to Cochrane to Crystal Glass. But if there's anybody near Crystal Glass, I would encourage you to stop by and say hello to Amanda. Now, Amanda is a person that I thought for years, whenever I would get my windshield fixed or any glass that we needed in our house, you always deal with the front end, the customer service person, Amanda. And Amanda was such an accountable person and so enthused and so excited and passionate about her work. I always thought that it was her shop, that it was her outfit. And I asked her once, Amanda, do you own this place? And she said, oh no, I'm a salaried employee. I work out front here. But she acted as if she owned it. And I said, where do you know, I said, Amanda, how many jobs you could get with the kind of attitude you have? And she says, I know. And she smiled and she opened her desk, and just ask her one day, if you ever come by here, just ask her to show you the stack of business cards that she has in her desk of people who have offered her a job because of the way that she approaches her work. And I said, how would you attribute? I'm always interested when I see a leader. It doesn't matter. She was a leader in that organization. She had virtually no title. The title didn't mean anything to her. But I said, where did you get your inspiration from? And she said, and this is where she showed me her wrist. And it was a little weird. I said, I got to take a picture of your wrist. This is what she had tattooed on her wrist. This is a quote from her grandmother. And she said, my grandmother told me to always smile. And soon after her passing, I had this quote imprinted on my wrist so that I could remember my grandmother's wisdom and inspiration. So this is what I would call an accountable leader, someone who takes responsibility, who doesn't wait for the boss to do it, but who steps in. Now, there's a little side story to this, because we had one person on our team, in fact, Ron may be on this call still after, who knows the CEO of Crystal Glass and a very good friend of, and so sent a post to the CEO of Crystal Glass. And I hope she's going to get some recognition. I actually just called her this afternoon and just gave her a heads up. I said, I just told you your story, and you might just get a call from your CEO about how impressed he is with you. And I think he's sending it around to his management team. So this is how we send it forward and pay it forward. Anyway, if the other Everest journey that I write about on this journey to authenticity is defined as embracing a time of great difficulty and adversity, if you will, allowing the pain to break us open so that a stronger, wiser, kinder self can emerge. Now, I know there are people on this call who have faced great pain in their life. I know some of you personally, and I know how you have taken this authentic journey, and that you have come out of that pain stronger, wiser, and a kinder self has emerged. Leaders view disruption as this: something is wanting to be born within me. And you could take any one of those stages of transformation and say, you know what, this is a very dysfunctional, that second stage in the transformation journey is just like mush. And you could send that to a psychiatrist and pathologize it and say, let's straighten this out. But in actuality, that mush is just a necessary stage in the transformational process. So leaders take accountability for the pain to say, well, there's an opportunity here. Now, I must say, you know what, let me get into that in another point around being real. I must say that when you see it as an opportunity, it takes time to do that. There's a key principle. You don't want to stand as a motivational speaker and give a motivational speech at a funeral. You know, you don't want to stand up and say, this is a great opportunity here. People have to grieve before they build. And we're going to get to that when we get to step 3. So that's the accountability piece. Now let me talk about the second piece, which is being generous. Leaders operate with generosity, and they operate with the statement, how can I help? There's 2 kinds of people in the world. There's people who help and there's people who hinder. There's people who build and there's people who complain. There's people who roll up their sleeves and are givers, and there are takers. And those in the leadership side say, you know what, how can I make it better? How can I improve and add value to the situation right now? How can I help? As soon as you have made a statement that says, how can I help? In my mind, you have stepped into this thing that we call leadership, even if I'm hurting. One of the things that I look at is that we need to grant grace with gentleness, generosity, and gratitude. And I learned this from Farm Credit, which to me is one of the finest cultures of a crown corporation anywhere in this country, in Canada. And one of their values is to grant grace. And I learned this from them years before the pandemic. I learned so much about culture from their amazing organization. And they talked about granting grace. And I have to just share with you a little email that came to me this week. Now, I have to tell you that my wife is away, and my wife is my administrative assistant. She basically runs my life. And I'm doing, and you know, you learn in this, when you run a business, you know, if you don't have an assistant, it means only one thing: you are one. And so I have been an assistant very poorly in the last week, and I've been trying to run my business at the same time. And I had a call set up with a potential very large contract with a client. And it's very unusual for me. I missed the call because I was balancing so many, and I just completely, it missed me. Now, what I've learned in my life is that the only person, what I learned from my parents actually, is the only person who cares why you let someone down is you. No one else cares. So, you know, I didn't offer an excuse. I just offered a profuse apology. And I said, it's not like me to not be accountable. And I thought I may have lost a significant contract on this. The email came back to me, and this is what she said. She said, this was a CEO of an organization. It happens to everyone, and I really don't like to see people stressed during these difficult times. So absolutely no worries. Now, you know what? That's granting grace. Now, if that's not an excuse for me to continue to be late and for continually not showing up, but you know what? Let's give each other the benefit of the doubt. And that's an act of leadership, to say, you know what, we've set up another call and it's going to proceed. And so this is what I mean. We need to be very intentional today, because we've all strained as we walk through this darn pandemic, and we all have judgments about it, and we're all doing the best we can. So let's just grant each other a lot of grace. My number 3 point is, let's be real. Let's be real through it all. Now, many of you have been through my leadership programs, knows that my map here, these are the 4 seasons of well-being. Now, I want to make it really clear that the seasons aren't as delineated. I mean, I live in Canada, for heaven's sake, as most of us on this call do. And you know that certainly in Calgary and west of Calgary, you can get a Chinook in January and be out in shorts in January, and you can get snow in July. So the seasons overlap with each other. But I would just ask you, what season are you in at this moment? And you know what? You can change seasons 5 times in a day. Just be in Canada. Just as we say, wait 5 minutes and the weather will change. But what's important is to be real, to where we connect. Now, as positional leaders, we all kind of feel this accountability. You don't get more power when you get promoted, but you do get more accountability. And one of the accountabilities, we feel like we want to bring our team along into the upper seasons. But folks, if you don't acknowledge the lower seasons, it won't be real. This is where you can't give a motivational talk at a funeral. You have to be real, and you have to allow the disruption to be there. It's okay not to be okay. And paradoxically, the way through the seasons is by embracing the seasons. The way through winter is not to sit indoors. And those of us who have experienced winter in our lives know this, both the winter metaphorically and the winter literally. You don't get through winter by sitting indoors and complaining about the weather. You put a warm coat on and you go out and get into the weather. You lean into it. This is the way that you embrace the weather. It's the way that you embrace these seasons. Don't avoid the fear and the loss and the loneliness and the self-doubt that we have all been through, and allow yourself to feel that and to have a community of people that you can be real with. Okay. And so if we don't deal adequately with the disruption, it will turn to anger, depression, irritability, and rage. And as we say in the trauma literature, in the trauma field, violence is what happens when we don't know what to do with our suffering. What have you been doing with your suffering in the last 2 years? What community do you have? Now, if we had a longer program, we would, there's strategies for dealing with each of these seasons. But my point tonight is just to recognize, if you're seeing anger either directed outward or directed inward in terms of depression, it means that we haven't dealt with those primary feelings adequately. And we see this in spades across our country, where we see divisiveness and we see anger just going for a ride. Notice the abruptness and the impatience in people. At any rate, just take a little snapshot of this and ask yourself, what season are you in? And what are you doing to deepen your reality? And let's be real with each other. This is the beginning of authenticity. But authenticity also requires that we take responsibility for our feelings, that we don't just live in them. Now, this is the F state and the C state. And the F state is what I call the sympathetic stress response, where we get into it's a biological response: the fight, the flight, the freeze, the freaking out. These are absolute reaction to adversity. And it's absolutely real and human to get into that F state. But folks, it is our responsibility as leaders, as contributors within our families, within our communities, within our organizations, amidst our colleagues. We cannot lead from that F state. It's irresponsible to lead from the F state. We have to have a process. And I would ask you to reflect. Again, we could spend time on that process, but I would ask you to identify explicitly what is your process. Now, I've had CEOs tell me, well, I only get into that once a month. And senior leaders say, well, I only lose my temper once a month. But unfortunately, folks, you probably aren't scheduling that once a month. You're not saying at 9 o'clock on the last Friday of every month, I'm going to lose it and go into the F state. No, the F state happens very spontaneously. So you might only experience the F state once a month, but the people who depend on you are living in that F state all the time. You've created a state of anxiety all the time, because they never know when the next shoe is going to drop. And many of us were raised in families like this, that we never knew when the next trauma was going to happen. And so we continually are living in that F state, because if you're in the F state, it will invite others to also be in the F state. And being authentic doesn't mean that we just spew the F state. We have to recognize and take responsibility to get ourselves out of that, so that we can have a community. It's okay to be there. We just can't stay there. We have to have a process to get out of it. For any Harry Potter fans on the call, we have to have a course, a defense against the dark arts. There's a dark arts in all of us. And what is our own particular and unique course for moving through those darker sides of our nature? So let's just talk more deeply about what does it really mean to be authentic along this journey here. So authenticity, the great mythologist Joseph Campbell said that the greatest privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. Well, who is this that we are? As Shakespeare said, "To thine own self be true." But what self are we actually talking about here? The best way for me to explain to you what authenticity is to tell you a story about my trip up north. Now, this is me behind a dog sled. I've worked with probably most of the divisions of the RCMP in the country. And I was up in Inuvik about a year before the pandemic. And I went up a day early, and they gave me a dog sled team on the Mackenzie River. It doesn't get any better. And I'll tell you, these dogs, and I'm going to share with you, these dogs are born to work. We all have our nature, and their nature is to work. Worst thing you can do is send these dogs to a work-life balance workshop or to give them a rest. They don't live long after they retire because they have no more purpose. In fact, you can't see this, but there's an anchor with it that you anchor that sled in to the ice. You have to pound it because once they're on that sled, they'll go. And the only instruction, well, they give you instructions on how to turn right, how to turn left. And just by calling out chi or cha, they'll turn left or right. But they said one thing, if you fall off, hang on, because they won't stop. They will keep going. At any rate, this was an amazing, magical experience to be with these animals, living their nature. And this is actually a William James quote, who said, there lies within every person a place where when we connect it to it, we feel deeply and intensely alive. At such moments, there's a voice, a silent voice inside that says, this is the real me. So just stop and ask yourself, what's it like to connect with that real voice? Hang on one second. Speaking of voice. I get so passionate about this. I drink and talk at the same time. Not a good idea. At any rate, how are you connecting with that inner voice within you? Now, the best example I got is, this is just an excuse to introduce you to my grandson. This is Ethan, who's now 15, actually, was up here at Christmas. He lives in Utah. And this is about residing in your own true nature. Anybody here who's a parent of more than one child, or an aunt or an uncle of more than one niece or a nephew, understand right from day one, kids have their own temperament. And this is the authentic self. This is who you are born to be in life. But here's what happens. We're born authentic with what I call a soul's desire, a seed of possibility to reach a destiny in this planet and in this lifetime. But what happens is that we grow up in a world that tells us how we should be, and we develop an accountable self to meet the society's demands. And this is an important, necessary task in the growth of human beings. But if we're not careful, we can lose touch with the authentic self and separate those two. Now, in between is what is called an adolescent self, a self-serving, impulsive self. Now, people have said, the whole notion of authenticity has taken a bad rap in organizations today because people walk around acting like a jerk and just being mean and a bully to people and say, well, that's just my authentic self. And I suggest, if you weren't born with that tendency, it's not authentic. You know, you learned that to survive. And I see people who say, you know what, I'm gonna leave my relationship and my kids, and I'm gonna take my secretary and travel around the world because that's my authentic self. Well, I suggest that you take a very close look at when you're impulsively living in your emotions. Just because it's an impulsive emotional reaction doesn't necessarily mean it's authentic. It doesn't come from your soul. You have to, and we don't get much training at really listening to the heart, at really living our life and align with the authentic self, which is a big component to my work. What I do know, though, is if we get too accountable in life, we're going to hit a red line. It can happen in an illness. It can happen in a divorce. It can happen in a death or an illness. And we just say, and I had a woman very astutely tell me recently, I know what that red line is, menopause, where we get to that stage in life where we say, to hell with what the world wants. I'm going to follow something deeper. I'm going to follow my own heart because I've lived my life taking care of other people. So at some point, we grow up to be accountable, but we grow down then to reconnect with our authentic self. And my work is to integrate those two together. And as we do that, the adolescent self begins to dissolve. So the best story I've got with this is my daughter. Now, her true essence, she's a performing artist, and her voice is to sing and to perform. But she grew up in a town that was a sports town. And so she never felt like she fit in. And she never felt like she belonged. And she always felt she was less than. And it wasn't until she met a musical theater instructor in high school who helped her find her place that she, for the first time, began to be real and to find a way to say, this is who I really am. This is the place where I shine. And she had a quote shortly after that: it's more important to be yourself than it is to be popular. Being popular only lasts until school is done. Being yourself lasts a lifetime. Now, she took a performing arts degree with an education degree at the University of Alberta. And she, one of the things she did was in her work, she took a clown class. And she was, it was a month-long class, and we came to hear her final production. This is where she shines. And this is what is not talked about: employee engagement. You want to get employees engaged? Let me tell you how to get employees engaged. Connect with their authentic self and create a place where they can be authentic, where they can be who they are. I don't know if you've ever worked in a place where you have to leave who you are at the door and you can't bring yourself to your work. And then we wonder, we would try to hammer them to try to get more accountable. And it's irresponsible as leaders. As leaders, authentic leaders, we need to create a place. Now, you know what? It's okay to say, maybe there isn't a place here for you. Maybe, you're bigger than what we can offer you here. Your gifts are beyond what we can offer you. Then help them move on. But even better to do that than to try to squeeze somebody in and fix people. We've spent far too much time, folks, fixing people instead of fitting people where their gifts and their passion is. This is what authentic leadership is about. Leadership says we get the job done, but authentic leadership says we help people grow in the journey. And what I think I was sharing was how important it is to build a culture where we create an opportunity for people to come and be who they are. What's it like to work in a place where you have to leave who you are at the door and pretend that you're somebody else? Let's be real with each other and let's be authentic. And I have this little list that identifies the difference between inauthenticity and authenticity. And inauthenticity means exhaustion and impatience and resistance and disengagement and disconnected and stressed and empty. Whereas authenticity means trusting and open and honest and calm and accepting and connected and joyful and peaceful and fulfilled. And it's not possible to live our entire lives authentic, but notice when we're not authentic. Notice the difference between good tired and bad tired. When we're tired using our gifts and when we're tired not using our gifts, and notice the difference. And finding that internal compass, that heart within us. And finally, folks, we've talked about being accountable. We've talked about being generous. We've talked about being real. And finally, I just want to wrap it up with being clear. And I want to introduce you in a minute to Kristen, because although some of you have already, as Kristen started her story, she jumps right in because she exhibits all of these qualities. But the one thing I want to say is the importance of clarity. Now, we can be clear about a sense of purpose, clear about our values, clear about what matters, but I'm going to leave you one thing to reflect on, and that is to gain some clarity around how do we define success in life? How would you define success? What does success mean to you? And I ask this question of my CEO clients, how will you define success? And I come up with 3 components to defining success for myself. And again, I don't have a corner on this. I would just ask, I'm just going to give you my definition of success. And then you can reflect on this and use it as an opportunity for yourself. Number 1, we need to achieve something. We need to have a goal, plant a flag and make something happen. You're not going to be successful sitting on in front of a device, listening to reacting to the internet. So we have to have a goal and an achievement. Number 2, we have to make a contribution. Take that achievement and have some significance in the world that makes a difference. Now, I've always known that there's 2 components, and I always instinctively felt that there was also a 3rd component, but I wasn't sure what that was until about 2 years ago. And a coaching client came into my office, and I asked, as we started all coaching clients, all coaching relationships, I said, "What brought you here?" And he said, "I just came from my father's funeral last week." Now, my father was a very successful entrepreneur. He had achieved a great amount. He was a philanthropist. He made a huge difference mentoring young people coming into the business. There was 1,500 people at his funeral paying tribute to my father. And I said, "So what's the rub?" And he stopped and he got tears in his eyes and his speech slowed down. And he said to me, "I loved my father. I admired my father. I respected my father. But my father was very difficult to get close to." And I don't want my kids, after my funeral, I don't want them to say that about me. And I want to learn how to do this thing called connection. And that, to me, those three components, and do we always have those in balance? No. But that is the path of success for me. In conclusion, before I turn the last 10 minutes over to Kristen, I want to tell you a story. And it's an Indigenous story that the great grandmothers used to tell their children, their grandchildren, would sit on their lap and tell their grandchildren the story of the hummingbird. And the story goes that there's a forest, and the forest caught fire, and the huge flames were raging, and the animals were all running from the flames, saving their lives. And as they ran from the flames, they noticed a hummingbird that was going toward the flames. And they stopped the hummingbird and they said, "You're going the wrong way. You're going into the fire. You must go away from the fire. What are you doing?" And the hummingbird explained that it was going over to the lake, filling its beak with water, and moving into the forest to help put the fire out. And all of the animals made fun of the hummingbird. And they all thought it was totally foolish. But as the story goes, the great spirit of the forest was so inspired by the hummingbird's actions that they opened up the clouds and they sent the rain to quench the fire. Now, the moral of this story, folks, is that if you want a miracle in your life, do your part. It may seem small, it may seem insignificant, but let's go against the grain and take the path least traveled and do our part courageously, accountably, with realness and with generosity and with clarity. Now, with that note, I'm going to turn the time over to Kristen. I am now calling Kristen the hummingbird in our business. She is the absolute leader and the epitome of leadership in our work. She exhibits all of these qualities. I was so inspired when she came into our program, and I said, I've got to have this woman on our team. So with that note, Kristen, and I so apologize to you for interrupting your story, but you go ahead and finish your great story. Thank you all. And thank you for spending grace. And I hope that we can all stay a little late tonight. So thanks.
Thanks, David. I just love that story about the hummingbird so much. So good. Okay, so back to my story. I was going to say how I ended up in my current role and position. So I was working as a realtor in 2006 when the Edmonton real estate market was exploding. And every house that was listed for sale was going into multiple offers. People were paying thousands and thousands of dollars above list price. As soon as a house came up for sale, you had to rush right over with your clients so they didn't miss out on a chance to see it before it was sold. Then you had to write up an offer that included extra money, as few conditions as possible, maybe even their firstborn child if they were really serious about this house. Follow that with lining up outside the property at the designated time and presenting your offer along with dozens of other agents. It was a bit intense, to say the least. There were a lot of things I loved about the job, but an insanely fast-paced real estate market was all I knew. And I wasn't sure if it was going to be a good forever fit. I really wanted something that would allow me to make plans and keep them. A work-life balance was really, really important to me and something I wanted to find. So one afternoon, I was discussing the situation with my cousin, and she randomly told me about a company called Telescope that was hiring. I Googled a company called Telescope to no avail, and then I called the phone number to find out it was a company called Telsco Security. I met with Joan, one of the owners later that week and was thrilled to accept a job as the receptionist shortly after. That was in 2007. I worked in reception for several months, then had the pleasure of taking on numerous other roles, including sales assistant, outside sales, trainer, inside sales manager, and my current role, which is customer experience manager. I was incredibly fortunate to work with a wonderful group of people that continually challenged me and saw potential that I don't know I would have ever seen in myself. Then came the first time I was ever directly responsible for another team member in 2014. This was when I became a boss. But as I noted, putting a timeline on leadership is a little bit trickier. One of my favorite leadership authors is Simon Sinek. I was first exposed to his TED Talk, Start With Why, in a marketing class at NATE, and I've been a huge fan ever since. I recently watched a video where he talked about the fact that leadership doesn't happen overnight. A very similar message to the one that David shared today. It's not that you're not a leader one day and then you are a leader the next day. It happens over time. It's a mindset. It's a process. You can't just read a leadership book, get a promotion, or attend a conference and boom, leader. He compared it to going to the gym or falling in love. Going to the gym one day doesn't make you fit. Working out hard for 2 hours, even 9 hours, won't give you defined abs or bulging biceps. But it's in the daily practice of all these little things we do day after day that make us stronger and start to transform us into a leader. The promises we keep, the support we offer, the trust we build. And this helped solidify that we can't really say exactly when we become a leader because we may not even know. Leadership, much like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. And we become a leader as soon as somebody wants to follow us. So somewhere along the way, I started my leadership journey, and I'm not 100% sure where I am in that journey, but I do know it's far from complete. Knowing I have so much left to learn and so many more ways to grow is likely part of the reason that I am hesitant to call myself a leader, even though I have people that call me boss. There's just so much responsibility that comes with being a leader. And could I really be trusted with this duty? By saying a leader, am I saying I'm perfect or I'm where I need to be? The word leader for me is pretty much the most esteemed word that one person can use to describe another. I don't know exactly where this stems from, but I have an extreme reverence for the word, and it feels a bit presumptuous or premature to be associating myself with that title. Thinking through all these feelings and being unsure of where it all came from caused me to wonder, what do I truly believe a leader is? How would I explain the magnitude and depth of this word that simply is defined in the dictionary as one who guides? It wasn't easy. Well, it wasn't for me anyway, but for my 11-year-old niece who was over on the weekend, it was easy peasy. I asked what a leader looked like to her, what traits they would have, and within mere moments, she had very astutely wrapped up what I had been struggling with. So from an 11-year-old, here is why I feel such a strong sense of responsibility when it comes to calling myself a leader. A leader is confident and decisive. A leader has the answers and knows what to do when things go wrong. A leader is a person who decides what is best for the group, not themselves. A leader keeps their promises. A leader is a good communicator. A leader is kind and patient. A leader is brave and loyal and speaks up when needed. A leader recognizes and supports the unique needs of each person. A leader makes everyone around them better. Wow. I was totally blown away by how quickly she was able to identify the traits that she associated with a leader. And very quickly, it helped me understand my hesitation around calling myself a leader. You see, I am not always a perfect communicator. I am not always confident and decisive. Despite my best efforts and genuine care, I sometimes let people down. There's times I react in a way that doesn't demonstrate perfect kindness or unending patience. I want to be all of these things. I want to be all of these things perfectly, all of the time, so that I'm showing up as the leader people deserve. And even though I've been working on these things and practicing mindfulness, there's a lot of room for improvement. Truly, I don't know if I ever will be the version of myself that I believe those entrusted in my care deserve. But because I am a leader, I won't stop trying. I'll read books and take courses and learn as much as I can from leaders I admire. I'll ask questions and be humble and graciously accept feedback. I will continue to care and offer support and be as authentic as possible. Because if I wait until I'm perfect to say I'm a leader, that day will never come. For now, the most important thing I can do is simply commit to being the best leader I can be every day for those that rely on me. It's what they think and what they feel that truly matters. So for now, a good step in my journey is simply being able to call myself a leader, even if there is a little asterisk at the moment that indicates I am a leader in training. Thank you so much.
Kristen, that's beautiful. That's very, very beautiful. And you just exemplify this. It doesn't surprise me that your niece would see those qualities in a leader. You've been hanging out with your niece and influencing her, I have no doubt. So thank you for your contribution today and to our team. It has truly been an inspiration to have you on board. You are truly a hummingbird on our team. So thank you for that. Thank you for that contribution. So folks, let me just wrap up the formal part of this. We started by talking about turning yourself into a leader by bringing your authentic self to 2022. Again, my mission is that I inspire leaders at all levels of organizations and in all walks of life to make a meaningful difference in the world, build lasting success, and create a life that matters by living and leading the authentic way. When my brother was passing and I was taking care of him a few years ago, I came across this book called The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker, and he talked about an immortality project, which is an endeavor that serves a noble cause and has enduring value beyond one's life. And combined with my brother's dying and my own confronting myself in this next chapter of my life, at the age of, at that time, I was 62, I'm now 66. And I began to think about what is it that I want to do with this next chapter in my life? What is my own immortality project? And I realized that for the last 35 years, I've been traveling all over the country, all over the continent, and now virtually doing presentations like this, doing workshops, giving people a coaching experience. But then I would move on to the next contract. And I began to realize that what I really want to do is to build a leadership community, a community of people who want to make a difference in the world, but do it authentically. And I began to develop this sense of a vision for where I really wanted to take this business, where it's a community and building a community instead of just these one and done, as we say, events across the country. Even though I still enjoy doing presentations, I want to work for a higher purpose and build a team around that. So out of that, I created this vision of building an authentic community. And at the foundation of that is this 2.5-day course, which is really the best of my material that I've worked with over the last 35 years. When it's safe to do so, we'll do it in person. But for now, it's a 2.5-day virtual program that's coming up in April. And if you're interested in this program, I would encourage you, Marg, our amazing VP of Client Care, is on our call today. And just you can certainly just make a note to email Marg. You can check out our website and check out all the information on it. In terms of the curriculum of that, it's the first half is all about your authentic self, your presence, your authenticity residing in your own true nature, transcendent leadership, stepping into your full purpose, credibility through character, self-awareness, and facing the shadow aspect of yourself. The second half is on leadership practices, what you do as a leader, fostering trust, embracing change, engaging talent, and ensuring accountability. So it's really the best material that I have. And what I'm offering you today is a special offer that if you register and bring an accountability partner, bring a friend or a colleague along, and the two of you register, I'll give you $200 off, $100 each off of your tuition. And I really have tried to make this a reasonable tuition so that it reaches more than just senior leaders. It'll be a cross-section of anybody who really wants to make a difference in the world. And I'm really proud to bring this to you. So if you use a promo code APartner, and the deadline will be February 3rd, that will just be available to you until February the 3rd. Okay. And with that in mind, I'm going to now stop sharing. I'd encourage you to turn on your videos and let's have a dialogue. I'd like to just give you, just to make sure that we all have an opportunity to ask questions. Just limit your comment to 1 minute. But the two things that I would encourage you to ask is, what are you taking away from this presentation, number one? And number two, if you have any questions that you'd like to reflect on and express before we leave here. And I'll be here for the next half an hour here during our time together. So on that note, I'm going to close the slides and have us come back, and would welcome. And if there's any